Algebra 2 students to the homework up video, page 200, numbers 17 through 22. Let's jump right into this. Here we go. The directions say to solve the matrix equations. And so here we go. Number 17, what I've taught you to do is to take the inverse, take the matrix next to the x and find the inverse of that and then multiply it by both sides. So let's find the inverse of this matrix. Step 1, find the determinant. Multiply up, that's negative 26, so I'm going to put a positive 26. Multiply down, that's negative 25. So my determinant is 1. So I'll put that right up here. Determinant is 1. Next, you change the signs of these two numbers. And you swap these two numbers. The positive 5 comes up here, and the negative 5 comes down here. Next, you take your determinant and you flip it. So it's 1 over 1. Flip it, you get 1. So you put the 1 here, then multiply it through. Well, obviously, if you multiply a 1 through, nothing's going to change. So this is your inverse matrix. Now you take this inverse matrix and you multiply it by this matrix here. But by doing that, when you multiply this matrix here times this matrix here, they just cancel out, okay? So there's nothing left but your x, okay? X equals, but then remember, you have to take the inverse times this side also, and I've also taught you, if you do not put the inverse first, and then this matrix second, you will miss the problem, okay? So we have a 2 by 2 times a 2 by 2. Run your test. Inside numbers match. Your outside numbers are 2 and 2. So the answer you're going to have is a 2 by 2. So we take this row times this column. First times first, 15. Next times next, negative 52. Subtract and you'll get negative, or combine, you'll get negative 37. Then take this row times the next column. First times first is 5. 13 times 0 is 0. Combine and you will get a 5. Next, we take this row here times this column here. Negative 2 times 3, negative 6. Negative 5 times negative 4, positive 20. Combine and we get 14. Then take row times column. First times first, negative 2. Second times second is a 0. Combine and you get a negative 2. So hopefully that's the answer. Yes, it is. So I'm telling you the answer to the equation is this right here. We're finished. But on a test or a quiz, if you ever want to check it, take your take your answer right here and put it, substitute this matrix in for x. So you take this matrix here times this matrix here, and you will get out this matrix here if you have the right answer. Okay? Alright, moving on. Number 18. An identical problem once again. Just like the last one, we have an inverse matrix. So we're going to take our matrix here, find the inverse of it, okay? And then multiply it by both sides. Alright, so here we go. Let's find the inverse of this. Step 1, when find the inverse of an inverse matrix, you find the determinant first. Multiply up. 35, I'm going to put a negative 35. Multiply down, you get 36. Combine and you get a 1. So your determinant's a 1. The next thing you do is you change the signs of these two numbers right here. So the 5 becomes negative, the 7 becomes negative. You swap these two numbers, so the 3 goes up here and the 12 goes down here. Next, you take your determinant and you flip it. So 1 is the same thing as 1 over 1. Flip 1 over 1 and you get a 1. So put that here. Multiply it through and nothing changes. So if you take this matrix here and multiply it by this matrix here, they cancel each other out, leaving you with x. But then if you multiply this side by this matrix, you must multiply this side also by this matrix here. So you're taking this inverse matrix and multiplying it by both sides of the equation. But don't forget, you will miss the problem if you do not put the inverse matrix first and then this matrix second before you multiply them. Please don't forget that. Alright, now, well, let's run our test. 2 by 2 times a 2 by 2. Your inside numbers match, so you're left over with a 2 and a 2. So your answer will be a 2 by 2. Okay, we take this row here times this column, so first times first is 6. Next times next is negative 21. Combine, negative 15. Now take this row times this column. First times first, negative 3. Next times next, negative 14. Combine, and you'll get a negative 17. Now we're going to move to this row here. Times each column. So this row times this column. First times first, negative 10. Next times next, positive 36. That gives you a positive 26. When you combine them, now take this row times this column. First times first, positive 5. Next times next, positive 24. Combine and you'll get a 29. Now if I've made a mistake, that happens sometimes, so understand that, but we're actually good. So this is the correct answer. Now on a test or a quiz, you understand you're not going to have the answer. So on a test or a quiz, I would advise you to very quickly, you could use your calculator if you want to. You take this matrix here, times, and you pick up this matrix right here and put it in for x. So you take this matrix times this matrix, and you should get out this matrix right here. Okay? Pretty simple. Number 19. Okay, now, I really don't see how any student would freak out or get all worried because I have a bigger matrix over here. Nothing's changed. I have a matrix, then an x, then an equal sign, then a matrix. So in order to solve this matrix equation, I must find the inverse of this and multiply it by both sides. Now, why do I find the inverse of this matrix and not this one? Because this is the coefficient of my x. You always want to find the inverse or the reciprocal of the matrix that is the coefficient of the variable. Or in other words, the matrix that is next to the variable. So here we go. Let's find the inverse of this matrix. The first thing you do when you're finding an inverse is you find the determinant. Multiply up, that's 0. Multiply down, that's 2. Combine, and you get 2. So your determinant is 2. Next, to find the inverse matrix, you change the signs of these two numbers. 0 doesn't matter, and swap those two numbers. Next, you take your determinant, which is 2 over 1, and you flip it. So when you flip 2, you get 1/2. Now multiply that through, and you'll come up with 1/2, negative 2, 0, and 1. I took 1/2 times each one of those numbers, okay? Alright, so that is now gone. I don't need this. I don't need any of this up here. There's my inverse matrix. Now, I'm going to multiply this times both sides of the equation, times this side and this side. When I multiply this times this side, everything cancels out, leaving me with x, okay? However, when I multiply the inverse matrix times this side, don't forget your inverse matrix must come first, and then the other matrix comes second. If you do not do that, you will miss the problem, okay? Alright, here we go. So let's run our test. We're multiplying a 2 by 2 by a 2 by 3. My inside numbers match. My outside numbers tell me that I'm going to have a 2 by 3 for my answer, okay? So here we go. Row times each one of these columns. Here we go. Row times column. First times first, that's a positive 2. Next times next, negative 6. So negative 4. Now take row times this column. 1/2 times 0, 0. Negative 2 times negative 1, positive 2. Combine, and we get a 2. Row times next column. 1/2 times 6, 3. Negative 2 times 5, negative 10. Combine, and you get a negative 7. Now we take this down to the next row. 0 times 4 is 0. 1 times 3 is 3. Combine, and we get 3. Now row times next column. 0 times 0 is 0. 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. Combine, and we get a negative 1. Now take row times the next column. 0 times 6 is 0. 1 times 5 is positive 5. Combine, and we get a 5. Now probably sooner or later before this video is over, I'm going to do it. We'll go back and find. Okay, so far so good. Okay, so we got it right. So here's my answer right here. I'm done. Now on a test or a quiz, if you want to check your answer, you pick this matrix up. X equals this matrix. You substitute it in for X right here. So you take this matrix times this matrix here, and you will, if you do it correctly, get out this matrix right here. Okay? Alright, number 21, pretty much a carbon copy of the last problem. Excuse me. Which is fine. Okay? Sorry, excuse me, which is fine. So, here we go. Now, we're going to solve this matrix equation. Okay? So what we have to do is we have to find the reciprocal of this matrix. So the first thing you do when you're trying to find the reciprocal is you find the determinant, or when you're trying to find the inverse matrix, you find the determinant first. So multiply up -9, put a +9. Multiply down, you get a -6. Combine and we get 3. So the determinant is 3. The next thing you do when you're finding an inverse matrix of a 2 by 2 is you change the signs of these two numbers. So your +3 becomes a -3, and your -3 becomes a +3. Then you swap these two numbers here. So your 1 comes up here, and your -6 down here. The next thing you do is you take your determinant 3 and you flip it. Well, 3 is really over 1, so when you flip 3 over 1, you get 1/3. Now multiply your 1/3 through. 1/3 times 1, 1/3 times 3, 1/3 times -3, and 1/3 times -6. So there is your inverse matrix finally. So the inverse matrix of this coefficient matrix right here is this right here. Now, we take this inverse matrix and we multiply it by both sides of the equation, okay? But we know if I multiply this times this, it just cancels everything out and leaves me with X, so I'm not going to worry about that. But now I must multiply this inverse matrix times this side over here, and don't forget the inverse matrix must come first, or you will miss the problem unless you get amazingly lucky, okay? And I don't think you want to base your grade on amazingly lucky. Alright, so let's take this matrix times this matrix. Let's run our test. We have a 2 by 2 times a 2 by 3. Your inside numbers match, your outside numbers are a 2 and a 3. So I know my answer is going to be a 2 by 3. Okay? So I take row times each of these columns. So 1/3 times 9 is 3. 1 times 4 is -4. Combine and you get a -1. Now take this row times this column. 1/3 times 12 is 4. 1 times 5 is 5. Combine and we will get a 9. Now take this row times this column. 1/3 times 0 is 0. 1 times -2 is -2. Combine and we get a -2. Now we're going to take this row here times each column. So -1 times 9 is -9. -2 times -4 is +8, and that gives you a -1. Now take row times column. -1 times 12 is -12. -2 times 5 is -10. Combine those two and we get -22. Now row times column. -1 times 0 is 0, and -2 times -2 is +4. Combine those and you get a 4. Now the answer is not here in the screen. Let me look in the book. They're getting -1, 9, -2, -1, -24. Good. Exactly right. So, actually we're getting pretty fortunate so far. So the answer is this matrix right here. And remember, on a test or a quiz, you can take this matrix, substitute it in for X, multiply these two matrices together, and you should get this out right here. Now the next two, we've never done anything like these before, so please watch carefully. Now I have a matrix times X plus a matrix equals a matrix. Now guys, come on, think about it. If I had 2 times X plus 3 equals 6, what's the first thing you would do? You would bring the 3 over and make it a -3, so you would have 2x equals 3. And then, then after you did that, then you would find the reciprocal or the inverse of 2, which is 1/2. And then you would multiply both sides by 1/2. And you get the answer, which is 1.5. 0.5. But what I'm trying to show you is before you found the reciprocal of 2 or the inverse of 2, before you did that, you first took your positive 3 and you moved it over and made it a negative 3. Well, it's the same thing here, guys. We don't want to start off finding the inverse of this matrix right here until I first get the problem to look like this. A matrix, then an X, and then a matrix. So, right now I have a matrix, X, then another matrix, equal sign, another matrix. So, I've got to bring this matrix that's positive to the other side and make it a negative matrix. Okay, it's a positive matrix, bring it over and make it negative. So what I would have, see if this makes sense, I'm going to cross this off, it's now gone. I'm going to bring it to the other side. So I have 6, negative 2, 2, 3. Bring this matrix over, but the outside sign becomes negative. Everything on the inside stays the same. And now I subtract these two matrices. Now you can do that by making this plus and going through and changing all of the signs. That's totally fine. Or you can just subtract. For me, you know what I like to do, I've taught you. I like to make it a plus sign and go through and change all the signs. So what you have is 6 plus negative 2, 2 plus negative 7, negative 2 plus 3, 3 plus negative 4. There. So I brought this matrix over, made it negative, subtracted these two matrices, and I'm left with this right here. So what I have then is this. I have this matrix here, 4, 1, 7, 2, times X equals this matrix right here. And now I'm ready to roll. Now I have a matrix, then an X, then an equal sign, then a matrix. So I'm going to find the inverse of this matrix and multiply it by both sides. In order to find the inverse of a matrix, you first find the determinant, multiply up. 7, I'll put a negative 7, multiply down. That's 8, so I'll put 8. Your determinant is 1. The next thing you want to do is change the signs of these two numbers here. And swap these two numbers here. Next, take your determinant and flip it. So 1 is really over 1. Flip 1 over 1 and you get a 1. Now take this and multiply it through. And obviously multiplying a 1 through won't change anything. So there is your inverse matrix. So I'm going to take this inverse matrix, students, right here, and I'm going to multiply it by both sides of the equation. When I do that, we all know that this side here will cancel out. I'll be left with just X. X equals. However, when I go to take my inverse matrix and multiply it by this side here, remember, the inverse matrix must come first, and this matrix must come second, or you'll miss the problem. So I have, I'm not going to go through and run this test. We've done a bunch of these 2 by 2s times a 2 by 2. We know the test passes, and we know we're left with a 2 by 2 for our answer, okay? So row times column, 2 times 4 is 8. Negative 7 times 1 is negative 7. Combine and we get a 1. Now row times column, 2 times negative 5, negative 10. Negative 7 times negative 1, positive 7. That's a negative 3. Now we're going to take this row times all the columns. So here we go. Negative 1 times 4, negative 4. 4 times 1, positive 4. So I get a 0. Negative, now row times this column. Negative 1 times negative 5 is 5. 4 times negative 1 is negative 4. Combine and you get a 1. So hopefully we're reasonably close. Good, we are actually right. So students, we found the answer. Now on a test or quiz, how could you check it? Well, pick up this matrix right here. It equals X, and substitute in for X right here. So you would take this matrix times this matrix, and then whatever you get out, add it to this matrix, and you should get this right here if you've done it correctly. Okay. Alright guys, well hopefully you've understood the stuff so far. One more problem and we are finally finished. Okay, here we go. Once again, a carbon copy of the last problem. So see this matrix right here? I'm going to write it right here. 1, 6, 9, negative 6. And I'm going to take this matrix matrix here, it's a positive matrix, and bring it over right here and make it negative. So now I have negative. And then this matrix here, 3, 4, 4, negative 3. So I'm going to subtract these two matrices. Now, I don't like to subtract matrices. I like to make this a positive sign and then go through and change all the signs. That's what I'm going to do. And here's what we'll get out. 1 plus negative 3, 9 plus negative 4, 6 plus negative 4, negative 6 plus 3. There we go. So I brought this matrix over here, subtracted the two and combined them, and I got this right here. So now here's my equal sign, and the only thing left on the right side is this matrix right there. On this side I still have this right here, okay? So we know what I have to do. In order to solve this now, I must find the inverse of this matrix right here next to the x. So when you're trying to find an inverse matrix, the first thing you do is you find the determinant. So multiply up, you get negative 36. I'm going to put a positive 36. Multiply down, you get a negative 35. Combine and you get a 1. So your determinant is 1. The next thing you do, students, is you change the signs of these two numbers. So 4 becomes negative, 9 becomes positive, and you swap these two numbers here. So your 5 comes up here and your negative 7 comes down here. Next, you take your determinant and you flip it. So 1 is the same thing as 1 over 1. When you flip 1 over 1, you get a 1. You put that here, then multiply it through. Now, obviously, when you multiply it 1 through, nothing's going to change. So I have my inverse matrix. Now I'm going to take this inverse matrix and multiply it by both sides of the equation. Okay? There's no need to multiply it by the left side. We already know that this times this is going to make them cancel out, just leaving you with an x. So x equals. However, we must take this matrix times the right side. Remember, your inverse matrix must come first, or you will miss the problem. Okay? So inverse matrix first. We have a 2 by 2 times a 2 by 2, so we will get out a 2 by 2. And here we go. We're going to take this row times these columns. So 5 times negative 2, negative 10. 9 times 2 is positive 18. Combine and we get an 8. Now this row times this column. 5 times 5 is 25. 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. Combine and you get a negative 2. Now I'm going to take this, move it down here. Now take row times column, then row times column. Negative 4 times negative 2, positive 8. Negative 7 times 2, negative 14. That's a negative 6. Now row times column. Negative 4 times 5, negative 20. Negative 7 times 3, positive 21, which leaves you with a 1. Now let me look in the book here and see if we got this right. And we actually did well, so we didn't make any mistakes in the homework. I'm surprised. It's really easy to make mistakes on these. So this is your answer, students. Okay, right here. So if you want to check it on a test or a quiz, you would pick this matrix up, put it in for x right there. Take this matrix times this matrix, whatever you got out, then add this matrix, and you should come up with this matrix right here. Okay? I hope this homework help video has been a help to you. If you have any questions, never hesitate to call or email.